Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR Podcast. I am Race for the Prize. Let's look at past optimal lineups for Martinsville in the Cup Series, figure out the structure and the build so that we can be successful. How many hogs/dominators or lap leaders do I need? Do I punt? Do I need value? We're not going to give you a definitive answer, but there are trends and structure that we can look at. But first, go to racefortheprize.com. That's where you get access to the Fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet. $30 for the month of April. PayPal, Venmo, Cash App the money over to me. I'll share the sheet. You'll have all the data, everything to help give you as much of an edge as possible, but also just makes the experience better. So we're looking at the 2023 fall race, and we've got, well, first of all, before we look at these specific lineups, let's look at the general trend with the hogs or the dominators or the fast lap/laps leaders. And typically in a race, we're going to get a guy who averages over the last, 8 races, 82 hog points. That's not finishing position. That's not place differential. That's just their fast laps led. Second guy, 58. So guaranteed, no doubt, no brainer, at the end of this Martinsville race, you need to have 2 drivers that were out front all day. End of story. And more than likely, you need 3. The third guy may not lead but for a short stint, but during that short stint of the race, he leads some laps, accrues some fast laps, and then ultimately finishes in the top 5. Your fourth guy in, it's a little bit lower, and this may not be a lap leader. It could be someone who runs at the front of the field, fast laps his way in, gets a solid finish, you bake in a little bit of place differential, and they work. The fourth guy may not necessarily be a dominator. And at Martinsville, we do have true dominators, 82, running out front the entire day, just not going to get past. We also get a pretty dominant performance at this race. So if you want to call them dominators at Martinsville, I have no problem with that. This third guy will likely not be a dominator, but will be fast and will have a moment out front. We have seen as many as 4 of these drivers, depending on someone being undervalued and maybe qualifying much better than expected, practicing much better than expected. But for the most part, we are really going to need to jam these 3 guys in because obviously 1 and 2 are there. Now you may be, well, maybe I don't need a third. But more than likely, a driver that scores this many hog points, in most cases, they're also going to finish in the top 3 or 5. So that's 40-ish finishing position points. So you throw 40, and that's low-end finishing position points with around 24. We've got 64. You put in a little bit of place differential, and more than likely you needed the top 3. Not a guarantee, but it's very close. And sometimes we even get 4 based on the pricing. Now let's also look at the trend of predicting where these come from. And for the most part, it's not as concentrated as we've seen at other short tracks or other racetracks, but still, we're seeing the fast laps/laps led come from your drivers starting up front, who generally were good in practice, who qualified well, but also it's hard to pass at Martinsville. And you can see here on average, pole sitters getting you 40 almost, 43, 27, 28, 22. So that's definitely something you can lean into when you're making your builds and trying to differentiate between which drivers you want to pick, who you like among a Truex or a Hendrick driver. Track position is going to matter. Now, here's another thing worth pointing out. I talked about this in the previous podcast. This tricky 11 spot. It's not really that tricky. You say, well, why all of a sudden do you get a guy down here in 11th? Well, this is because this driver was very fast in qualifying, but they just missed out on getting into round 2. And so if this driver had qualified into this round, they very likely could have been a top 5 starter. They just missed out based on their group. And so the 11th spot is another place that we like to target. They more than likely had speed in practice. They just missed out. So it's definitely somewhere I will be willing to go. You can also throw in the 12. And we've got one outlier here in 20. I might as well go and explain this one. This is Christopher Bell when he goes on to win the race. If we break down, he had a very good practice. The explanation of probably why he didn't qualify as well, and I think I've got it on here, or if I don't. As a situation of Group A versus Group B qualifying, track rubbered up, didn't so look good in his practice session. He goes out, track's different, just doesn't do well in qualifying. He quickly drives through the field, gets the lead on pit road around lap 329, and pretty much is in control from there on in that race. And then he actually loses the lead because of pit strategy at the very end, but then is able on 4 fresh tires to regain the lead and go on and have a good race. So he is the outlier starting 20th, but again, we can explain that based on the Group A, Group B situations you're going to run into this week. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to come into this race and chase someone down here, but they are viable under certain circumstances where we see a driver that we really like, that is running really well, who has a lot on the line, and then it just qualifying doesn't go his way because you just don't nail that one lap and adjust to the adjusted track. And so that is your outlier. But you want to target the front. You want to target the front of the guys that just missed. And there could be an outlier performance, although I don't really expect it. This was a very special race where he really just didn't qualify well. Because even if he is able to regroup, he still has to beat drivers that are fast and already starting up front. But Bell was hot at that moment and was looking pretty good. Okay, let's look at some of these past lineups, try to get an idea. Again, I'm leaning towards 3 for sure hogs, sometimes 4 if we've got the pricing according. And then you've got your 5 to 6 guys who tend to be cheaper. The question with the 5 and 6 guys is, do I double punt? Do I single punt? Well, the answer is over the last 8 years or so, you do not double punt, and you rarely punt. And I know that might come as a surprise because we're going to have to spend up more than likely for an expensive dominator / hog. 10-4 for Ryan Blaney, 11-5 for Denny Hamlin. And that leads you to believe I'm going to have to go really cheap on the back end. But as you can see, just last year alone, we had not necessarily a surprise, but a driver who was affordable that was able to lead laps and run fast laps. Almirola used a little bit of strategy, but that's fine. I mean, you get track position, he hangs on. He just needs a solid finish to the day. He gets his short stint out front where he accrues fast laps and laps led. We could very much see that as the case. Penalties and pit road will come into play, and that opens up 4 hogs because you've got a cheaper one, and you also have a fairly affordable Chase Elliott. While it's true we're probably going to have to pay up for the top 2, the case that we are seeing is that we're not really having to take an extreme punt. Again, we're looking at 3 to 4 dominators. That's what you get in this race. 4 pretty maxed, but we get the cheap guy who goes on to have a pretty decent race. And then what we see in a 5-6 build for the most part is guys that are affordable, maybe underpriced. And the trend typically is these drivers are running in the top 20 all day and they finish a little bit better. Burton had a little bit better race than this. He got spun out a couple times. He was more of a top 20 driver if you go through it, and he gets a better finish than what his average running position was. Again, his average running position should have been a little bit better. Had an incident early in the race, or in the middle part of the race, it kind of lowers his average running position. Had a pretty good car. I mean, if you go back to 2020, he won at Martinsville. This is his home track. It's a home track for Wood Brothers. You can throw all that in there, but to separate from that and zoom out, what we really are seeing from those 5-6 values is not necessarily punts, but more of, can this guy hang on to the lead lap and then finish a little bit better than where they've run? And then 3 to 4 hogs. And our hogs aren't always surprises, but fairly obvious. Ryan Blaney, really good at Martinsville. Denny Hamlin, really good at Martinsville. Elliott, I mean, these are some of the best Martinsville drivers, period. End of story. Almirola, we've already explained. Now, I'm not going to be able to provide complete context for every single one of these guys and going through every single lap. But in general, what we're learning here right now is we're looking at 3 to 4 drivers who are pretty much top 5 drivers all day and lead laps, run fast laps. And our value is the top 20 driver who finishes a little bit better. So going into this race and you're making your lineup, You're picking the obvious guys who can crush. And there's that 11 spot. There's that 12 spot. Even Elliott just a little bit off there. And then obviously Danny Hamlin starting up front. All right, we'll look at the spring race, see what we can find here. Again, Chase Briscoe has become phenomenal in the next-gen car at the short flat tracks, at Martinsville in general, starting up near the front. Very affordable. So having this affordable dominator / hog, whatever you want to call it, allows us not to punt. You got to pay up for Larson, which is fine. He is actually starting 19th. Not really the greatest position, but he gets some fast laps by getting up front. He gets up for it with some place differential. That'll work. Denny Hamlin, 10-1. Not a surprise. Gets us a little bit of both worlds. Now we're getting a lot of these laps spread out. You have a really big day from Ryan Preece. Doesn't finish as well as he should because of a pit road issue. I think it might have been a speeding penalty. Cycles back into dirty air, can never get back to where he was, but an SHR4 with a good car. Hey, look at this, another SHR4 guard. Eric Almirola, very strong last year at this racetrack. Fast laps, average running position, running in a good spot. Starts up front. Again, very affordable. And again, we end up with a balanced lineup, and then Ricky Stenhouse is your guy. Surprising that it's Stenhouse, sure, but it's not surprising that her value is a 17th place car that finishes 8th. The value tends to be, can this guy hang in the top 20, and you hope that he just benefits at the end. He ends up staying out. There's a bunch of cautions at the end, and he hangs on for an 8th place finish. And that's probably going to be the case. And I hate to tell it to you, but when you are picking amongst those top 20 drivers who are going to be the value play that sneaks in, it's not necessarily going to be the driver that was fastest in practice. It's not necessarily going to be the driver with the best track history. It could simply be the driver that just plays the right gamble, makes the right move. Maybe they get in the right lane on the final restart. Or maybe it will be the best driver. But here, no one came into this saying, oh, well, obviously Ricky Stenhouse is going to be the play. Anyway, biggest takeaway. You got 1, 2, 3, 4 hogs in this lineup as well. Now, it helps because they were affordable, but it's very likely that DraftKings is not going to exactly know how to price people going into this Martinsville race if they weren't necessarily sure about the 2023 next-gen races. Now we've got a new package, a tire that wears. I would not be surprised to see a driver be undervalued that shows up fast, qualifies well, and leads laps. You've got Ryan Preece starting first at 7,400. I know sometimes it's hard to buy in. It's hard to believe. But believe me, at Martinsville, at the paperclip, you can trust it. You can lean into it a little bit. Track position means a lot. If the guy was fast in practice and fast in qualifying, there's no reason why they can't hang in. And even in this situation, he faces adversity, loses 14 place differential points because of the speeding penalty, and he still ends up with an optimal day. 2022 fall. All right, we're still looking 3 to 4 hogs to see if we can break free of this trend or not. This is the Christopher Bell situation that we explained earlier. 1 hog, Denny Hamlin, 2 hogs, Kyle Larson, 3 hogs. And then the 4th guy in runs around the top 10, books you some place differential, gets you some fast laps, and is affordable. The 4th guy is affordable by running up front, gets some fast laps here or there. Obviously, the place differential and the finishing position. Gotta get that top 10 guy. And then when we look at value, we've got Todd Gilliland, egregiously priced at 4,800 at racetrack where he has been solid in the Truck Series and the Cup Series. Runs at 17th. Doesn't get the huge boost that we have seen from some of these other value guys where they get, a finish a little 6 or 7 or 8 spots better, but you don't really need it when he is only $4,800. And in this case, because we spent for an 11.4 Hamlin and an 11.7 Larson, and Bell wasn't necessarily super cheap. This is one of the few scenarios where we have gone down to a punt. A double, and now you can say, well, that's a double punt. I guess, yes, you do have two drivers under $5,000, but Todd Gilliland is not a punt. He is much more of a value driver. Yeah, in this situation, he was in that classification of being super cheap, but I would not consider him a punt by any means. He was starting the race 19th, regularly a top 25 driver. When we're thinking punt, we're really thinking at the back end of the field, a Cody Ware. And we do have to jam in Cody Ware, who average running position of 31st, finishes 29th, just simply all that you can get to make this thing work. Now, if we were to look, just to real tell you quickly, 2022 fall race, 22 spring race, 21 spring race. So we do have 3 occurrences since 2020 where there's been a pure punt. Other than that, we do not. So again, it was both 2022 races in that new next-gen car and then the 21 spring race. So we'll look at 22 spring, and we'll just start with that punt. It was Ty Dillon. Average running position 28th, finishes 23rd. He was your punt in 2022, running for Legacy Motor Club. Maybe not. Maybe you could classify him in that Todd Gilliland range, but that really was not that strong of a year for him. His teammate fits the classic mold of a value play. Jones never really been that great at Martinsville or some of these short tracks, but good enough to hang on the lead lap, get that boost at the end at 7,100, maybe a little bit more than you want to pay, but still pretty solid. Had a pretty solid year that year, by the way. And then as far as hogs, 1 and 2, really running away with the show. A third guy who runs inside the top 10 in Austin Dillon. And by running inside the top 10, he gets you some fast lap points, booking some place differential, and affordable. Ross Chastain, also similar situation, gets you a place differential, running close to the top 10. Solid finish, not bad. And, it's hard to pass up on these guys starting where they were. And this race was really controlled by 2 Hendrick drivers. So they soak everything up, and you don't have a third expensive hog. It just didn't happen because everything went to those 2 drivers. So this one's a little bit different in that we had 3 or 4 guys really leading laps. This one, it was more concentrated, so you took the value, but still had guys that were running in the top 10 and getting fast laps. Very concerning, though, that you didn't get other plays pop up. 21, fall race. 1 guy stealing the show, and Chase Elliott leading all the laps. That's going to lead to a different lineup. When we get some fast laps out of Alex Bowman, some in terms of 39. Very affordable price tag. We're going to get a very balanced build. Eric Almirola, SHR Ford's popping up a lot over the years. Eric Jones, again, you're like, oh, well, there's Eric Jones again. You said he wasn't good at Martinsville. His average running position is 18th. But again, he fits that perfect mold of value driver that just gets a better finish than where he ran. And that's what you're going to look at, and you're going to hope that you have some sort of data set that's going to help you predict who that top 20 driver who benefits at the end is going to be. But if you know it, let me know. And because we have all this value here at the top, and then we have all the expensive guys slotted in here, we actually kind of overpay for just the 8th most fantasy points for Kyle Busch. We kind of overpay here for Chris Buescher back in the day. Not the greatest equipment, but average running position 14th, finishes 9th. 1 guy runs away with it. That was that 21 fall race. 21 spring, that's, yeah. Denny Hamlin, 1 hog. Ryan Blaney, 2 hogs. Familiar names. Christopher Bell gets your place differential, scrapes off enough, and was still pretty cheap. So that's how that works. You can't afford these 2 guys who, they're running up front in Truex and Larson. They're accruing fast laps, but they just don't work. And so your third guy in is more of a place differential. He doesn't really scrape much hog points. Your fourth guy in, runs up there, pretty affordable. William Byron, running in the top 10, scrapes off some fast laps, gets a good finish. Our value, Bubba Wallace doesn't really get the boost, but it appears that no one else had the boost. 7,300. And fortunately, our top two guys were not the most expensive, so we could go up to a Bubba Wallace. And then this is another one of these punt situations, taking a Rick Ware car. Actually has a home run day here. 33rd average running position for James Davison. Finishes 22nd. You get cautions at the end of Martinsville. It can happen. So there are your optimal lineups. Biggest takeaway for me is I definitely need I like 3 lap leaders. If you want to classify the third as more of a guy who runs in the top 5, gets fast laps, it's fine. The fourth tends to be, again, a driver who can run inside the top 10, cruise some fast laps, maybe bake in some place differential, and is affordable. But again, we really want guys up front. Our top 2 are really probably leaning on where they're going to start the race. I don't want that tab. When we're making our top 2 picks, we're really looking at starting position. You can also look at the familiar names like Elliott, Hamlin, Blaney. But for the most part, when I'm looking at my top 2 picks, I'm really leaning in this area. I'm also going to look into that 11-12 spot. And then from 3 and 4, I want top 5 drivers who can get some fast laps, maybe lead some laps, maybe the race plays out in their favor. And then from a 5-6, depending on how expensive my 1 and 2 are, if my 1 and 2 I project to be really expensive and I feel very confident in, the guys that are really going to knock it out, then I will look into that 5K range and maybe try to find a punt type driver. But I also would rather go to a 5-6 build, my 5th and 6th drivers in, that look more like guys that are going to run in the top 20 and then get the better finish at the end. I'm not saying it's going to be Cindric and Burton, but that's where I would go. That's a typical build. Hopefully that's helpful. Remember, racesurprise.com. That's where you can get access to the fantasy NASCAR spreadsheet. $30 for the month of April. Tons of races this week or month. Jump in on there. Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. Please like the videos right now. Please subscribe to the videos. Share the videos. Leave comments. I respond to all the comments. I'm blessed to have you guys around. I love you guys. Trip to Light, fantastic.